With this, we move forward to our next discussion. Moving forward, if session 1 was about opportunities ahead, session 2 is about the values that ensure we reach them, building trust through ethics and governance.
Trust in business is like a Wi-Fi, invisible, but when it drops, everyone notices.
And in boardrooms today, governance and ethics are the true signal strength that keeps organization connected.
So with this, may I now invite our next set of panelists, CAPR Ramesh, CS Savitri Parekh, CA Pinaki Chaudhary, and moderator CA Ashok Barat on the dais, please.
May we request everyone to kindly be seated, please. We are moving forward with our next session.
Can we have a big round of applause for the dignitaries on the dais?
May I now invite on stage CA Manish Raj Dhandaria, Executive Committee Member ACAE, to introduce the speakers. I'll also request past presidents CA Vasudev Agarwal ji, CA Arun Kumar Agarwal ji, CA Madhav Sureka ji, and CA Indu Chatrat ji to please come forward and present the memento to our speakers for the session.
Hello.
As we introduce them.
So now, let me formally introduce our panelists and also the moderator. To start with CAPR Ramesh, former chairman of Deloitte India and noted independent director. CAPR Ramesh is a stalwart of corporate governance. He will reflect on the evolving role of independent directors in strengthening the trust. CAPR Ramesh is also the past president of our association. So I would like to invite CA Vasudev Agarwal ji to felicitate CAPR Ramesh. And also the coffee mug. Our next panelist is CS Savitri Parekh, Company Secretary and Compliance Officer at Reliance Industries. Mrs. Savitri Parekh is a leading authority in company law. She will share perspectives on the pivotal role of compliance officer. I would like to call CA Arun Agarwal ji to felicitate ma'am. And our next panelist is CA Pinaki Chaudhary, partner at PwC with 3 decades in audit and assurance. CA Pinaki Chaudhary is a respected name in the governance. He will discuss the critical role of auditors in building corporate credibility. Now I would like to call Indu Chatterjee to felicitate CA Pinaki Chaudhary with the memento and the coffee mug. So now, last but not the least, moderator of the session who will drive the whole panel discussion, CA Ashok Barat, former MD and CEO of Forbes and Company. CA Ashok Barat brings decades of leadership across industries. He will chair this panel on ethics and governance. I would like to call CA Madhav Sureka to felicitate CA Ashok Barat. So in every sphere of life, be it a business or any profession or public service, trust forms the foundation of the long-lasting relationship. And trust can't be built overnight. It takes strong governance and also the ethics. So without wasting any time, I will like to hand over the session to Mr. C. Ashok Bharat to taking it forward. It's all over to you, Ashok ji.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving us all an opportunity to have a discussion in your presence and in front of such an august audience. It's not just something that we will be speaking, but also your feedback, your comments, and your questions, which will help us understand the subject, which is a little complex. It has often been talked about, but something that there is no end to this conversation. And therefore, any kind of interaction will be most welcome, and it will be very educative to all of us. I thank ACAE for giving us this opportunity, and it's the most appropriate platform that I could think of for having a conversation in this subject. We have been introduced to the panelists. I'm not going to repeat that, but except to say that ACAE has been extremely wise to choose the three most important stakeholders for the topic that is under consideration. We have Mr. Ramesh, who is an eminent independent director of very large corporations. And of course, given his past, he has been a very distinguished auditor as well. So therefore, he brings two hats to the table. Madam Savitri needs no introduction. She is, in fact, we were just having a conversation over tea. She's a heroine for many, including men and women both, for her various accomplishments, and she is considered to be an authority on the subjects that she deals with, and she therefore represents the compliance function, the most important fiduciary function within the company. And last but not the least, we have Pinaki Chaudhary, who is a very eminent and distinguished auditor. They are the independent third-party voice, which has a complete visibility of the entire governance framework and the outcomes that come arising thereof. So with such a distinguished and diverse panelists, I think we will have a very interesting conversation going ahead. Let me start, and this is a question that I will throw to all three of them. The topic of today's discussion is building trust through ethics and governance. I'll have just three questions, and I think this would be fair enough to capture most of the sentiments that this topic should cover. First, let me start with trust. It is something that we need both in personal as well as professional life. The question is, how do we build trust? Because first and foremost, trust by itself has different interpretations depending on who the stakeholder is. For example, if I am a consumer of a company, my trust equation or quotient with the company will be with respect to the quality of the products that is produced and the price and the value that I derive from that. So that's my interpretation of trust. If I'm a taxman, my interpretation of trust would be how fair are we in recording revenues and costs so that the right amount is captured for the purpose of determining tax, and so on and so forth. So that's the first complication when you talk of trust. Is therefore building trust not just a consistent demonstration of values beyond just legal compliance? This is the hypothesis. And the second one, which is equally important, is having earned trust, how do we retain and sustain it? Trust cannot be transactional. A sum and a sigma of transactions is what creates and sustains trust consistently over a period of time. Therefore, linking it up with the subject, is governance the answer? Is the governance the answer to maintain and retain trust? So over to you, PR, for your views.
Thank you. I didn't know I would be the opening batsman. These days, being an opening batsman is not an honor. Nevertheless, let me take on the subject of trust and governance. In my view, governance is a role, trust is the conduct through which you discharge that governance role also effectively. So you can't be untrustworthy and at the same time expect to discharge your governance function. Equally, you are absolutely right in saying trust is not transactional, trust is not an event, trust takes years to build and can be destroyed overnight. And trust is through the lens of variety of people. So one of the fundamental things, elements of building trust is who are you, what are you associated with, your products, what are you known for, and most importantly is your conduct. So you can't be unethical and yet be trusted. And for sure, if you're ethical does not necessarily mean you are trusted, because there are other elements to building trust. Just as members, when you're dealing with a professional or when you're dealing with your doctor, when you're dealing with anybody else, how do you trust that person? It doesn't go by qualifications. It doesn't go by stature. It's in a way related to reputation. And reputations take time to build. That's one thing fundamental we have to realize. Having said that, how do you maintain trust? And what are those indicators that you can be trusted? For instance, if you have if you're habitually been fined, you can't say I can be trusted to comply with laws and regulations. You have breached laws and regulations time and again. Second is the association of persons. Are you associated with persons of repute or associated with persons of ill repute? Third, sometimes, unfortunately though, the very nature of your industry may lead to a situation where you don't trust, because that whole industry may be branded as untrustworthy industry, sometimes over periods of time. There have been times where a certain industry has defaulted or let down their consumers. Therefore, that industry is branded as untrustworthy. You get tainted by the same brush. So is it with professionals. And lastly, what I really want to say is trust is never visible. It's a feeling. And you experience it, but you can't see it for yourself. And that's where I will stop, because in the interest of time, we need to have others to speak to.
So, Savitri, please.
Thank you very much. I would just like to build on, as was very beautifully said, that trust is invisible. Going back to the question, how do you build trust? How do you maintain it? And maintaining it is equally tough, or sometimes tougher than building it. In fact, that raises a very basic question. How do you trust someone before even you get to know about the person? Does trust precede knowing the person? And same is the case with a company, its products, what it stands for. I think the three main ingredients of trust are transparency, accountability, and integrity. But these are just the starting point. When you talk in terms of what do you stand for, there has to be a communication which has to be transparent, holding yourself accountable for the good of the society. Because if you're in isolation, I mean, profit motive cannot be the reason for existence of any organization. That's just a byproduct. Because you're doing well, you also make money. There's nothing wrong with it. At the same time, how do you maintain it and how do you retain the trust that you've built? That's tough because you need to consistently display the same behavior. Actually, trust is like the core values that an organization stands for. It is manifested through conduct, and to put it very simply, compliance is one area where the governance practices of an organization are displayed. But then compliance in isolation cannot show that you are well governed. For example, just because a driver ensures that all the signals are duly obeyed by him will not make this driver a good driver. So there's something more to it. And how do you put in the extra piece? And Trust is more like the framework based on which the policies, practices, organization structure gets created, which forms governance, and it is in turn implemented through compliances of these policies, procedures, etc. Of course, statutory compliances is one offshoot of this. That's not the whole story. But then what is immediately seen is with respect to compliances, because that's action. What guides your behavior is what is the core value, and based on that, the trust of the different stakeholders gets built and multiplies over a period of time. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Ramesh has said that as the opening batsman, so you can understand the uphill task that I have on my shoulder if Mr. Ramesh is the opening batsman and followed by Savitri. Any which way, I will just try to take it forward from there. And I would like to put it like this. If I make a distinctions, while there will be a lot of commonalities between ethics and governance, before I can get into the trust, because trust is the ultimate outcome, which the other speakers and the moderator has also mentioned, that that's what is intangible, right? Now, so far as ethics is concerned, goes without saying, the ethical foundation will be around integrity, objectivity, professional competence, behavior, as well as confidentiality. So in here, if I just leave a flavor from the role of an auditor, while all these are given, but integrity once again is very, very intangible. It is something which cannot be defined in a rule book. I don't think any rule book, any stories or any regulations can ring fence integrity, because that is something which is very natural and core, needs to be built with the tone at the top or with the tone at the family. Similarly, as a role of an auditor, confidentiality. No matter how many regulations you would have within your organizations or by the regulatory environment, it will still be beyond that, right? And so far as governance, I think the way I see is that ethics without governance will be something like fragile. And governance without ethics will be completely blind. That's why both are required in the journey towards achieving trust. The way governance, I would say, is more on rule-based, compliance-oriented, but I have to also say that it is not just restricted to compliance and much beyond that, right? It has to do so far as the controls or the risk assessments, and in this evolving world, it could be like the geopolitical risk, it could be the trade risk, or it could be the legal risk, all of these, right? I think both together helps and paves the way how trust can be built, which definitely is very intangible. And to the second part of it, right, we have seen that how, if trust is achieved in one place, how it can be sustained, right? We have also seen that dinosaurs have become extinct except in movies making a lot of monies, while cockroaches are still seen in the best of the households or best of the kitchens of the five-star restaurants, right? But be it as it may, I leave it there. So the question of sustaining with something that is achieved, if that is trust, first thing is that in this evolving world, with the example of dinosaur and cockroach, I just want to make a point of adaptability with the evolving world, right? If something has helped you achieve are not necessary that those are the same things will help you sustain with that. So in this evolving world, one has to be very adaptable. That is the first thing. And how that would be possible? As an auditor or as a professional, I would like to see it that people or the organizations or the society embrace, like say for example, the focus and the thrust today here in India as well as in the overseas would be much more on the quality of the revenue and the profits earned than the quantity of the profits. Then only it will become sustainable. Like say for example, it is much beyond compliance, as I have said, right? Why? You may be required to carry out certain social work as part of the CSR. You may be required to carry out certain things as part of the regulation in a territory so far as ESG is concerned. But the question is about intent. Are you doing much beyond that from the core of your heart? That will make you sustainable. The law may not mandatorily require you to give a guidance, but as a prudent to make something sustainable, one can think of giving guidance to the investors much in advance, which would be helpful. One can think from the societal perspective that beyond regulations, beyond the financial things, one can think of fostering insights about something. If I can give an example, like around the labor laws. Labor laws, many laws are there, but an organization, an individual can always foster insights so far as how any laws and regulations can be made more and more equitable as we stay in the current situation. I think in the interest of the time, I will pause here.
So thank you very much. I think one summary, if I were to take away from the conversation that just happened, is that compliance is a necessary but not an essential condition of governance, and therefore to win trust. It is something like salt. You miss it only when it is not there. Otherwise, you assume that it has to be there in any dish. Which brings me to a very a question that often confuses me. You see, compliance has two subtexts. One is laws which may vary from country to country, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Most of the people present in an audience like this would have businesses and business connections or business transactions with countries across the world. So laws have got different requirements in different countries. More important than law is the cultural subtext. A practice which is considered unethical and therefore something that might actually create lack of trust or may be considered to be bad governance may not be considered in another. And I'll just give you one very simple example, gifting. Gifting is absolutely imperative in Japan. In India, gifting is not always imperative, but there are social occasions and cultural occasions. Say, for example, Diwali, Durga Puja, Ganesh Chaturthi, Eid, where it is very important to exchange gifts as a token of goodwill. Now, how do you strike a balance when it comes to that? Over to you, PR.
Yeah, this is perhaps the most difficult question, because it is true that cultures across various countries, the value systems in those countries vary, and what's right in one country could be wrong in another. Similarly, the laws vary differently. And even in our own case, our laws, the lowest common denominator is the common criminal. And unfortunately, everybody in the corporate world has to follow that law. And it's actually very difficult for very large enterprises who may have good systems. The law was designed for somebody who's not so. So how does one go about it? First is, as far as possible on certain subjects in the organization, you have the lowest common denominator as the most extreme situation in a country. Second is ensure that in each of those geographies, you comply with the local law for sure. Third, where the biggest challenge comes, and I'll give you an illustration. When in the accounting world we were trying to align with IFRS in India, in this very hall, I remember the discussion, somebody raised the issue, and when we were proposing the definition of related parties, the definition of related party included live-in relationships, which is very common abroad. So if you have a live-in, they are not married, but they are living together for several years. So aren't they related? For a related party, shouldn't we capture it? In this hall, somebody stood up and said, how can an Indian standard have that? You're blessing something which is against Hindu culture. We should not. It should be a carve-out from IFRS. That opened my eyes to these cultural differences. But the reality is when you're framing a standard, that standard applies across the world. Ind AS, for an Indian company, it applies to all transactions across the world. So it should capture that sort of definition. And that's the illustration which I will leave with, which hopefully drives home the point.
Savitri.
Sure. So actually, I'm going to be taking this question more from a compliance perspective and the diverse laws in the different countries. Of course, Mr. Ramesh has already mentioned about the sensitivity to cultural differences as well as the public policy with respect to matters. While there are a few examples that I can talk about, but I'm actually going to be speaking more from a legal perspective and how do you ensure compliance? As was also mentioned, you take the least common denominator and ensure that that's put in a system. Today, it's very common for all the companies, no matter how big or small the enterprise is, to have a system-driven compliance rather than one where you, note down the compliances manually. So you need to have the system put in place. Additionally, you also need to have sensitivity to the specific provisions. Why talk about different laws in different countries? In our own country, like say for example, if you have an office in a place in one of the metros, you would need to look at the municipal laws and you will need to have the name board of the company in that local language. And if it's not there in the local language, you end up getting criminal proceedings also in few of the states. I do remember one of the organizations that I worked for earlier, there was a notice that was received and they were about to start criminal proceedings against the chairperson of the company because the name board did not have the name board in the local language. So I think these sensitivities need to be understood. And of course in India you have multiple laws both at the central level as well as at the state level. For example, something like stamp duty. One needs to understand as to whether it's in the central list or in the concurrent list or in the state list and ensure that proper stamp duty is paid. So ironing out these differences within the country, and of course if you have an office outside India, then ensuring that those laws are also met is something which one needs to be conscious of and ensure compliance. Let me take another example. Even in a place like USA, in the different states, you have laws which are different. Like say, for example, something as simple as liquidation. In the Texas law, the word used is liquidation, while in another state, the word used may be winding up. The two have different meaning under the Companies Act, but at the same time, like for example, if you talk in terms of winding up in India, it's either voluntary winding up or a compulsory winding up, while if it is a dissolution without winding up, one understands it's in the context of a court procedure. But these terms have specific meaning in the laws overseas. So one needs to understand those and use the correct technical term when you're making disclosures, because what you are doing needs to be properly disclosed. So suffice it to say that one needs to understand the laws of the country that you operate in principally, as well as the laws of the countries where you have branch offices or other offices. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Pinaki.
So once again, all have been said about. So then I have to only recapitulate without validating. In good old days in my boyhood, whether I have known it wrong or right, but still I would make an attempt to say that when you are in India, behave like an Indian. When you are in Rome, behave like a Roman. So far as the variety of the laws and regulations under the sun across territories are concerned, goes without saying, without any doubt in anyone's mind, that whenever those are required to be applied, the compliance is non-negotiable, right? And in this evolving world, again, I have to say that I am witnessing many things that if you operate from here also, but you have some distant operations through some chains, intermediaries, subsidiaries, associates, somewhere else in the globe, like in the European Union, then also for your global compliance, you could be required to do something which will resonate to a large extent the laws that are existing there. Like say, for example, in the climate thing about the CSRD, which is applicable in European Union, that can be applicable to many of the companies moving forward, there are some time, 3-4 years. But without getting into the technicality, just if I can give another dimension, and when I made that statement, India in Indian, behave like an Indian, and when you are in Rome, behave like a Roman, that definitely has to be taken in the right and the positive spirit, because there will be always two sides of the coin. One is the positive and another is not positive, right? Now, I will just very briefly want to take this opportunity of this question to leave a thought in everyone's mind without concluding, because the question itself actually can be debated from various perspectives, right? And again, I am coming back to the topic, trust, ethics, governance. As I said, that ethics is largely behavioral. So there can be situations of dichotomy, there can be situations of dilemma. Let me just give one example, a very low-hanging example. Let's say an organization has come up with some financial irregularities that has surfaced. There can be one behavioral pattern, which can be the leaders or those charged with governance can think that they will self-report that, despite knowing that it can shake up the market, despite knowing that it can dampen the profitability in the short term. But their thought process could be that it will hold the long-term value. On the contrary, there is nothing wrong. There can be another school of thought who would like to go by the governance book and rightly maybe appoint an investigation committee and come to the public with the outcomes of the investigations. So definitely, I will not say right or wrong about it, but I just wanted to make a reference of this to the moderator's question of different things applicable that is in one place, or even the same thing applicable in here can have a different positioning without going wrong or without non-compliance. I would leave it here.
So Pinaki, I'm going to use your statement to ask the last question, which is a tricky question, but I'd expect some candor in that. But before I do that, I'll take Tarunji's permission to to relate an anecdote on this cultural subcontext. When Ariel detergent was first launched in the Middle East, and those days, people didn't have washing machines; it was buckets. So they had a carton which had 3 illustrations. A lady dipping the clothes into a bucket of water in which Ariel had been added. Then second bucket was rinsing it, squeezing it, and the third one taking it out, and here the shirt was completely white. The soiled shirt become. They found that despite the fact that they had a huge advertisement budget, the product was not selling. It was just not selling. It didn't move from the shelves. Then somebody realized that in Middle East, Arabic is read from left to right. So what the people were interpreting is that you take a white shirt, wring it, and when it comes out, it is yellow in color. So this is the cultural subcontext. I used to work for a company which was one of the largest distributors of Toyota cars in the Middle East. And 3 to 4 years before a model was launched, they would send us a list of names to each and every distributor in every country of the world. And we had to certify that which of those names had a negative connotation in that market. Because, sometimes a word that is very, innocent here might actually mean something profane or something, bad in another language. So therefore, and this used to happen, and they would send us a list of 30, 40 names. And we had to go to the local university. In fact, in the Middle East, the tribes are very important. The tribes have their own dialects. So therefore, we had to go to the tribe, chieftains of those tribes, read out that word, and take a a certification from them, or at least a confirmation from them, that it did not mean anything that was obnoxious or something that would upset them. This is the huge power of cultural subcontext. Now let me come to the last question, which is very important. Now, so this ethics and governance is used in a very synonymous way, I believe incorrectly, because ethics is about character and governance is about conduct. But in all the three roles that we have sitting on the dais, whether as an independent director and as a compliance officer, and particularly I'll emphasize on compliance officer because she has two challenges, and as an auditor, there is always a situation where there is a conflict between your professional standards, your personal standards, and what your company or a board or an employer or a client expects you to do. How do you deal with that so that you don't destroy either, don't compromise the interest of the company or the client or the employer, but at the same time don't destroy or compromise the trust and the ethical standards of your own requirement? And the question specifically for Savitri is that is governance, compliance, building trust only the responsibility of the compliance officer? Or is it a culture that needs to be set across the organization? Because the compliance officer is merely someone who at the end of the transaction reports it, compiles it, reports it, and is responsible for it and accountable for it legally. How do you deal with this challenge? So I will ask Savitri to answer first in this case, and then PR.
So, actually, the compliance officer is more like a conscience keeper. It's ensuring compliance is not the responsibility of the compliance officer alone. It's the responsibility of the whole organization. It is.
Savitri, you are left holding the baby.
Absolutely.
That is the reason why I want you to tell us your secret. How do you hold the baby and yet make sure that the nappy is not leaking?
Absolutely. So what you need to do is, right at the beginning, ensure that you create awareness and make people participate in it. Let me just give a simple example of LODR. In fact, in India, earlier, compliances were considered as the basic benchmark, and therefore, if you were compliant with respect to the provisions of law, it was sufficient. Secondly, the compliance officer would get all the details at his desk or at her desk for compliance to be ensured. I mean, I would take the example of Companies Act 1956. It's not exactly so, but it is more or less the case. Like, say, for example, a simple one is 187C of the old Companies Act 1956. Unless and until the disclosure paper reached the company secretary, there was no filing required. Today, compliance is inside out, where the compliance officer needs to create the awareness across the organization more actively. For example, the same principle has also found its mention in LODR under Regulation 30, where it says create awareness, and ensure that the information comes to you, is what in short Regulation 30 says with respect to material events to be disclosed. Let me give a simple example. If you've received a penalty from any regulator for an amount of 10 lakhs and above, you need to make a disclosure within 24 hours. For 1 lakh and above from a regulator of that particular industry-specific regulator, it requires disclosure. Now, let's assume a penalty notice comes at 6 o'clock in the evening on a Friday. Your 24 hours gets over on Saturday. And you cannot go back to the regulator and say, hey, it happened on a Friday. So how do you create the systems to ensure that you're completely compliant? You need to create awareness not only with respect to the seniors, but also persons who are actually receiving, which means the compliance officer now needs to be a part of the processes of the organization, understand as to how it is done. You may not know how a car is manufactured, but you need to know how the letters do come to the organization.
The compliance officer has to have a very strong business and value chain orientation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that is the secret sauce.
And you ensure that everyone participates in this compliance, rather than saying, hey, you never asked me, this is the compliance to be done. That's gone. I mean, I'm reminded of Mr. R.K. Lakshman's cartoon, where he said, on the one hand and on the other hand, and the managing director says, I only want a company secretary with one hand.
Lovely, thank you so much. PR.
Yeah, your question was, what do you do in situations where your personal values conflict with
or
your
even
role?
Maybe your professional judgment.
Yeah, whatever. Conflict with your discharging your role. Let me give you an anecdote. which is in Abdul Kalam's book itself. Abdul Kalam, when he was president, and this is quoted by him in his book, what happened was the Supreme Court, I understand, passed in one judgment, interpreted what is office of profit. And then said office of profit also includes situations where you are not even taking salary. Even if you're not drawing 1 rupee, it is deemed as an office of profit. And I'm here not taking any political sides. I understand a leading politician was chairperson of UP State Film Development Corporation or something like that. And Supreme Court said, if you hold an office of profit, you will have to vacate your seat in the parliament, disqualified. Now suddenly, because of the judgment, there was political chaos. Here was a person who was in multiple, as you know, politicians get into various bodies, and they are not drawing any salary, but they are holding those positions. So what the government did at that time was changed the definition selectively for exempting, say, some 150 entities from that definition of office of profit, and sent that document to Abdul Kalam as president for assent. So he found that this is completely partial, this is not fair, this is absolutely unfair. So what he did was he returned the document. He says, no, this is completely biased and unfair, sent it back for consideration by the cabinet. Sure enough, after a certain period of time, the document came exactly as it is approved by the cabinet to the president. That is when Abdul Kalam was in a dilemma. And for the first time, I mean, I didn't know, he revealed that, I think it is the Swaminarayan sect chief, whom Abdul Kalam considers him as his guru, even though he was non-Hindu. So he reached out to him and said, what do I do in this? Patently, it is seems unethical or unfair. So that guru told him, you are President of India. What is your role as a President of India? Is to grant assent provided a process has been followed. Now here is a case where he followed the process of returning it for reconsideration. After reconsideration, it came back exactly as it is. He said, you have no choice now but to grant assent. And he said, now my conscience is clear, though it is against my own principles, and he approved it. And this is what happens in situations if you are given a role. Now you have to apply the law and discharge your role. So long as you have followed the process, whether you are an umpire in cricket or you are a director on a board, your own personal values may be different. The question is it non-compliance with law? Is it immoral in the context of the society, but difference from your own morality? And that is how those situations are handled.
No, thank you very much. I think keep your emotions separately. Discharge the role that is required. You're likely to come across these situations far more than anybody else.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, fortunately, unfortunately. So I think I would echo both the speakers. And if I just give the flavor of those thoughts and share my perspectives, giving a stench from the role of an auditor. First, I would like to mention, as Mr. Ramesh has given the example that our late president, Mr. APJ Abdul Kalam, went to the Guru and what the Guru has said, right? So first of all, I would say that to my mind, the way I see, governance basically sets the rules of accountability, and ethics basically drives the behavior within those rules, and beyond. I would like to emphasize and beyond. So if I have to say from the perspective of discharging the role of an auditor, I have to say that what is the role first of all? The role is to provide credibility. The role is to provide confidence. The role is to build trust. So if this is the roles and responsibilities, first thing first, to me or to the auditor fraternity, transparency is just not a choice. Transparency is a must for an auditor to earn credibility so that the auditor is in a position to provide credibility. That is one. Similarly, likewise, building trust once again for an auditor is not a choice. I want to remove if there is any doubt, because building trust is the essential responsibility of the auditor. Why I am saying that? Because auditors not only serve clients, auditors also serve public trust. And that is within the code of ethics also. So that would be the role of the auditor, irrespective of what the practical situations of the circumstances as may be. Having said that, one definitely will have to take the best of the decisions under the circumstances, which is judicious. So I would leave it there.
Thank you very much. I wish I had the opportunity to learn more from the people on the dais, but I know that we are standing between lunch and appetite which must have been built up by now. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, the panelists. There are several questions that I would get them answered offline for my own benefit. And thank you, Tarunji, for giving us this lovely opportunity. Thank you.
It was, thank, yeah. Okay, one question, please. Yes, yes, we can take.
You can give this.
With the permission of the London moderator and all the efficient panelists here, my simple question we are discussing about the compliance. Now, I think the Indian economy, the way it is moving now, that there is madam is representing Reliance, the biggest company. Now, the compliance for the Reliance and the compliance for its 100 crore companies are the same as of today. Look at the practical difficulties that people are facing of those 150 crore, 50 crore companies. They are also listed companies, no doubt about that. But the practical difficulties, PR is more experienced on that, but more on the large companies. Mr. Chatterjee is also dealing with the companies. But my experience says that the compliances which are given for the higher up companies, the threshold limit companies, and the compliances for the limit that one, there should be some relaxation between that, because the small companies are facing a lot of difficulties because of their compliances. Now I'm telling you one more example with regard to related party transactions. Now the related party transactions for Reliance is something different. But related party transactions for a Calcutta-based company having a turnover of 400-500 crore rupees will be different, altogether different. So with these experienced and learned panelists, can we send a message to the government that there should be some relaxation with regard to compliances, with regard to a threshold limit of the companies, so that the small companies do not face these kind of difficulties? It's my only question or suggestion or whatever it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Savitri, you might want to answer this question, in particularly since SEBI is now looking at a graded for related party transaction particularly.
Sure.
So you are part of the committee, so you would.
So once again, the graded, the consultation paper which is out, no, that's right. See, actually, compliances or rather governance is more like character of a person. We cannot say that so-and-so person's categories of person can have lesser character. Having said that, yes, if you have chosen to be listed, then the path initially may appear to be tough, but then compliance is something which is the basic form of governance. Governance is manifested through compliances at the basic level. So, yes, of course, the cost of compliance as compared to what it was earlier may seem to be rising, but this is more like the investment. It's more like the foundation. If you want to have a very big structure, you need to go deeper down. You need to have a very strong diaphragm wall around the compound. Otherwise, you cannot go up. So it's an investment which you're doing. What is important is that investment made at an activity level for taking care of compliances today, or is it one which is sustained, where once you've invested today, it's just going to be paying back over a period of time? That's exactly where the policies, processes, the ethical principles which govern become important. I'm actually reminded of a time when I was asked to address group of startups, and a very, very similar question was raised as to when should they start thinking of compliances. Should it be after they are 50 crores turnover? The point is, when do you start thinking of building character in a human being? That's exactly what works over here too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will close the session.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful panel discussion. And one thing is sure, that trust will be built in number of years, but it can be destroyed within a day. Thank you all the panelists and the moderator for taking this session. Thank you so much. So one more thing, we'll be starting our next session after the lunch at 2:30. We'll be starting the session at 2:30, and towards the end of the this seminar, there will be a lucky draw, and the first prize is the laptop, and there are lots of other prizes. But the condition is the person has to be present here to take the prizes. Prizes will be given only to those who are present physically. Otherwise, it will be not given to anyone.